All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Oregon School District. This is our annual meeting and budget hearing. So good evening. My name is Troy Pankratz. I serve as the president of the Oregon School Board. And this is the annual meeting of the Oregon School District pursuant to Wisconsin State Section 120.08. This meeting is prescribed by state law and electors are invited to attend. As electors, we have special powers reserved to us as a body, and these powers are outlined in the state statute. This meeting will be conducted according to the rules of parliamentary procedure. We have an agenda for the meeting that will be our guide, and there are some sample motions in the annual meeting handout this evening. Those are on the green sheet. So before we proceed to item number 2 on the agenda, I would like to ask the members of the Oregon School District Board of Education to introduce themselves. Actually, I'll introduce them. So again, I'm Troy Pankratz, the president. We have Anna Bijak, our vice president. Mary Lakuda is here right in front of me. She serves as our treasurer. And then we have Leslie. Here's Leslie as our clerk. And then Nathan Hensel, board member. Dr. Caleb Bush, thanks for waving. And probably forgetting someone. No? Heather, of course. Heather Garrison in the back. So that is our school board members. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Weiland for our annual budget hearing.
Thank you. So I've been told I'm going to try to keep this to a half hour, so we'll keep it moving. Yes. So the first thing that we like to do is mention that the books have been audited by our accounting firm. They haven't submitted their final report yet, but they have submitted the information to the DPI. So pretty much the numbers are final, and those are the numbers that we're going to go from. To start with, because the first thing we like to do is kind of tell everybody in the school district kind of where the finances are as of the end of last year, so that we can kind of build upon that. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is spend a little bit of time talking about the financial report as of June 30th, 2025. So thanks to Erica for the cute pictures we've added to the presentation, just to kind of give a feel for why we're really here. Last year, when we look at funds 10 and 27, and just a reminder, those are our main operating funds of the school district. 10 runs just about everything except food service and some other components. And then Fund 27 is connected to Fund 10, and it runs the fund that basically helps students that have IEPs in the school district. So they're combined, they're linked. If there's not enough money in Fund 27, Fund 10 needs to supply that. So when we looked at those two funds, we add them together just as a way to keep it simple. So from the revenues last year, our budget and our actual, we were within 1% of where we anticipated being. So that's kind of really right in where we would anticipate being at the end of the year. We did have a little bit of an overage in revenue than we anticipated, which is a good thing. On the expenditure side, we spent a little bit less than we anticipated. Actually, it's a fairly large amount of money, and I want to explain that a little bit. The reason that that's a large amount of money is 5.2 million of that is what's called carryover funds, and we didn't spend that basically because we assigned it for specific purposes. Now, we actually are reducing that amount going into the next school year so that we can increase our unassigned fund balance, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But this wasn't intended to actually be entirely spent, is kind of the point that I'm trying to make. So even though it looks like quite a bit of money left over, it wasn't planned to all be spent. General fund balance, I just mentioned that. Like to talk real briefly about what that purpose of the fund balance is. It's prescribed in policy. And the Board of Education recognizes that we need to have a fund balance, and there's several reasons why. The first one is to provide adequate working capital sufficient to meet the district's cash flow requirements. We don't get all of our money spread out through the entire year, In fact, the majority of our funds come kind of after the halfway point of the school year. That's when property tax revenues come in. So we need significant reserves in order to cash flow till that point. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. It functions as a safeguard to fund unanticipated expenses, and it demonstrates, and I'm going to go back to 2, it also helps us when we're not sure about our revenues. And if there ever was a time to kind of understand that, that's basically this current year. And then it demonstrates fiscal responsibility and maintaining a district bond rating. When different rating agencies look at us, when we're about to issue bonds for capital expenditures, basically they look at our fund balance and what our fund balance has been doing from a year-to-year basis, and to determine how good of a risk to assign to us, so that we will pay less interest if we're a better risk than if we were a worse risk in their eyes. So a strong fund balance actually indicates a better risk from the bond rating agencies. And then this basically is kind of connected to one. It just the unassigned general fund balance helps us cash flow. So this is very similar information than what we were talking about before, except this is the actuals rather than comparing budget to actual. We're comparing actuals to actuals, so it gives you a different flavor. So our revenue was $73.8 million with those 2 funds combined together. Our expenditures was 69. We had some non-special education transfers. The reason why I say non-special education transfers is the special ed transfers are actually in here already, right? Because the 2 funds are connected. So it's just the non-special ed. The majority of that, $1.25 million, was connected to an intentional increase in our fund balance that the board voted on last year when we did our budget adjustments at toward the end of the year. So we actually intentionally increased our fund balance, and I'm going to tell you why in just a second. And so we intentionally, I'm sorry, I got a little bit off. Part of this is actually to reduce debt service so that our tax levy didn't go up as much. This actually increased our budget by the 2.8 million. Of that 2.8 million, 1.25 was an intentional increase. I talked about assigned fund balance quite a bit here. Last year, I said that our assigned fund balance was 5.2 million. We've got it down to $2.4 million this year. A lot of that fund balance was connected to long-range projects, things that were strategically identified throughout the pandemic, and we've been able to reduce that and increase our unassigned fund balance as a way to cash flow, and I'm going to get to why in a second. But the 2.4 million is basically the addition of these things up here. So we have building carryover, which is actually at a lower point than it has been in several years. District department carryover, actually still a little bit inflated from the pandemic, but coming down fairly rapidly. Director of instruction, the same thing. Education, the Oregon Education Association, that's from our 2016 referendum. We still have some funds left over from that. And then grants, again, kind of part of that pandemic component. We probably will be closer to $1 million would be our goal when we kind of get some of these things through the process. So I talked about kind of cash flow components. This is simply a way to look at our funds. Now here is not only Fund 10 and 27, but we added some other funds because they're all combined into one checking account. And when we're looking at from a cash flow perspective, we include Fund 21, which is a special projects funded. It's kind of local revenues that it funds itself. There's no tax funds that go into it. 50 is food service, 80 is our community ed funds, and then 99 is a co-op fund, which basically just runs the Badger Conference right now. So what you're looking at is our monthly cash balances at the end of each year, or at the end of each month, based on the year. And so you can kind of identify real quickly when we're in a lower component, a lower area than we like to be, which is kind of our November, December area. Now you'll notice that this year we're starting stronger, and that's intentional. We raised the additional 1.25 million, plus we had some additional funds left over at the end of last year. So we're starting from a stronger point of view. So if you just look at this chart, you'd say, okay, November, December is kind of when your low point is. But then we added a mid-month cash total, and you'll see that that's actually a little deceiving. Our low point is actually a little bit lower than what November would show, and that's in actually January. So we're probably right around $2 million left in fund balance. And if you recall, we had a unassigned fund balance of $2.4 million that we budget each year to be spent. So if that money actually was spent, we would have a cash flow problem potentially right in here. It'd be very close. So that's why I'm kind of sharing with this to you, is that we need to continue to cash flow. But when we had $5.2 million, $5 million is right here, we absolutely had an issue. If we would have spent all that $5.2 million last year, we would have been in a little bit of trouble. We would have had to go basically borrow to meet our bills. So we are in a better position starting this year. We have our unassigned fund balance at about $2.4 million. And this is last year's number. We'll see where we are here with that higher spot. Looks like we're in a significantly stronger spot than we were last year. And I hope that continues. Here are the components of our fund balance as the end of June. Fund balance is made up of a lot of different components. The majority of it is cash in the bank account, but not all. So we have non-spendable. That's actually mostly land and some inventory type things that we can't spend or can't be used for cash flow purposes. Restricted as well as assigned. Unassigned is really our main cash flow vehicle here. So board jumping to a different fund, we're trying to quickly go through each individual fund here. We do have a cash balance of $4.1 million in our debt service fund. This is the fund that pays for the debt bond payments related to the construction projects that we've done over the last 20 years. The main ones being, for instance, the room we're in right now, the additions from 2015, as well as the addition of the school Forest Edge in 2018. So those are the payments that are due in September only in the fall. Basically, we have to have enough money to make the payments throughout the fiscal year and for next fall, because we won't have the tax payments for the following year until then. So what this is basically saying is we have plenty of money in order to make those payments, and we're in a good position there. A capital trust fund is where the bond proceeds are put into when we do a referendum. So this fund is actually from Forest Edge, and we are still paying that out. One of the reasons that is, and we'll show you that in as we talk about next year's budget, but the referendum actually allowed us to use it for safety improvements as well as the building of Forest Edge, and we've been slowly sending that down. So I'll talk about that in a second. But at the fund balance, and I'm sorry, I am totally off on this one. This is actually for our capital projects fund, not related to the referendum. I should have looked more closely at it. This is the money that we put a couple years ago related to our TIF district, aside for capital projects and basically for roofing and for pavement purposes. This is connected to a 10-year plan that we have that occasionally we review every year, so that we can have that in case we have a large capital project that jumps up and we need to fund it. All right, this is the project Fund 49, which is where we put our bond proceeds when we have a referendum. And here, just showing you what happened last year. We started the fund the year last year at about $300,000 still left. We actually made another $9,200 in interest earnings, and then we did spend close to $200,000. The main component of that was we moved a driveway at Forest Edge, and then we had significant amount of security improvements. We're down to actually at the end of August, I think we're closer to $50,000. We made some additional security improvements at our offices this summer that cost some funds. So we really do anticipate having that fully spent by the end of this fiscal year. Food service fund. We started the year at $152,000 last year. Revenue of $2.17 million. We did transfer, as was approved in the referendum back in 2022. to subsidize the food service employees' salaries to get them into a more competitive situation. We did transfer $116,000 and then ended the fund balance here at 128. That was better than when we thought we were going to be, but we're getting closer to being neutral, including the transfer of general fund. Our hope is this year, with the transfer from the general fund to subsidize those salaries, we'll be closer to a zero. Community Service Fund. This fund has a balance. This is kind of an unusual fund because any balance that we have left over in it has to be used to reduce the levy for the following year. We actually had a couple employees in this fund that were budgeted for the entire year, but they weren't here for the entire year last year, and because of that, we had a significant balance. The $143,000 was left over in that last year. That will actually reduce our levy for the Community Ed Service Fund for this next year. So, kind of some tax relief in that area. OPEB liability. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. It's basically a promise that we have to our employees to provide a benefit. Mostly it's health insurance to our employees after they retire from us. So the revenues in that fund were about $419,000. That is mainly interest earnings, as well as some contributions for employee premiums. So the district doesn't pay the entire premium for the employees. There is still a component that the employees have to contribute, about 10% of the insurance. And so there's some funds that come in from that, the expenditures, and then we did have an equity decrease in that area, but we still have $6.4 million, and again, brought in about $331,000 in interest. That's because the interest earnings, interest rates right now are fairly high compared to where they've been in the past. That is starting to decrease, so something for us to be aware of. We are required to make this statement in our presentation at the annual meeting that I serve as kind of the investment person for this fund to make sure that we are investing the funds in a safe way and having a return. Okay, if you didn't think that was all complicated, this is really going to be a doozy. I apologize from right from the get-go on this. This is a 4-year history of what's going on in our OPEB area. And it introduces a concept called implicit rate subsidy. And it's one of my least favorite components to try to explain to people, but I'm going to try my best real quickly. Basically, GASB, which is the Governmental Accounting Standard Bureau, says that when we provide insurance to older adults, that they cost more money than other people in our insurance pool. And because of that, we're theoretically supposed to charge more funds to that. And so the implicit rate subsidy, the actuaries actually identify what that cost is, and then they basically make us give that money back to the district and use it to reduce the premiums of all the other employees. Kind of strange. Fortunately, our fund is so well funded, it basically, we weren't able to put a contribution in there this last year. The years in the past when we made those contributions, we would basically take that implicit rate subsidy amount and actually put it back into the fund. And so it was kind of a weird thing where they'd say we have to give money back to Fund 10 and Fund 27, and then we would increase our contribution and put it back into the fund in order to basically fund the fund quicker. But we've actually achieved the point where it's fully funded, and so we weren't able to do that this last year. So even though we actually see a change, a slight decrease in fund balance, the majority of that was related to this implicit rate subsidy. That had we had a larger liability, we would not have had to do that. We would actually increased the contribution, but you can see there's a zero contribution. So this is important because part of the reason the fund balance went up by the $2.8 million that I mentioned earlier is because we weren't able to make a contribution to OPEB. That money then stayed in the fund balance and increased the fund balance. Not a bad thing, just something to keep in mind. We are due for a new OPEB liability study, and we'll be starting that this fall. We are required, based on the size of our district, to do one every 2 years. So last time we did that, we had about a $400,000 liability. We had that fully funded last year, and so this year we're going to take a look at that. I will also mention that we are looking at this liability, this benefit actually, and looking to basically change and improve the benefit, and we'll be bringing that to the board here in the next month or so. So another component of OPEB or Fund 70s is we actually have two funds in Fund 70. One is the OPEB one that I just mentioned before. And the other one is the employee trust. And that's when we have employees that have sick leave and they have the need, based on the district's determination, to put those funds aside from their sick leave payout into a trust fund so that they can use it for insurance contributions in the future. And this just kind of shows what happened to that. We went down a little bit in this because of the implicit rate subsidy, the OPEB column. We actually went up, and that's simply because we had more employees retire, put more contributions in there than the employees took the money out. So that's a very quick, although probably a little bit tedious, rendering of where we are on our district finances. Overall, we actually addressed some significant problems from a cash flow perspective, and we are in a good spot. So now I think I'm going to talk a little bit about the next budget. And this is always helpful to kind of understand where we are in the process. We changed a little bit this year and actually added a preliminary budget based on some recommendations from different groups within the state of Wisconsin. So we kind of started our staffing, and that really determines probably the majority of the budget from that perspective. Back in March of each year. Then we go into June and we have to kind of approve a preliminary budget. The reason they want you to do that is technically our budget starts on July 1st. So they want something in place approved by the board so that everybody kind of understands where things are as we get into the next fiscal year. So lots of decisions kind of happen in this time period. But then the final component, and this is based on kind of, I like to call it the Frankenstein nature of the school finance in Wisconsin, where this annual meeting was really the defining component of the budget for people for years and years, decades, until the revenue limits came about in the 1990s. But now we have kind of a different timeline for ourselves here. So we brought a preliminary budget to the board on September 8th. They approved that. We put that into the paper on September 11th. Tonight, we're doing our budget hearing, and if people have feedback, this is the opportunity to do that after I'm done giving our presentation. This might have just changed as of earlier this evening, because usually we have a work session in October, mid-October. This year, unfortunately, that date's a day or two earlier than we would like. But in the end, our original budget has to be placed and our tax levy has to be approved. Typically, we do that on the fourth Monday in October. So that's the process. For the most part, again, the structure of the budget is already determined kind of in March. But we're waiting for numbers and different components related to enrollment, which third Friday was last week. Related to how many students we anticipate, because that's component of the revenue limit, as well as our certifications of our equalized values, which happens at the end of September or the beginning of October, and then our state aid, as well as calculations related to voucher payments happened basically in mid-October, so that we can incorporate those into our budget. So our revenue projection assumptions, again, kind of started way back when, refined throughout the year, was we did estimate an increase of 15 FTE, full-time equivalencies of resident students in our projections. We started with a 0. Based on how the year was going, we actually increased to 15. Preliminarily, it looks like we're pretty flat for this last year, or for this year. We might even be down a couple students compared to last year, and that's probably not to be surprising, since we graduated a very large class last year, I think around 320, 330 students, and our kindergarten has come in about 250 this year. So the reason I mentioned those two classes is as there's a grade progression throughout the district, the difference between our seniors from last year and our kindergartens from this year put us in a deficit right from the get-go. We actually have to then, if those are the numbers, 330 and 250, we have to increase our population throughout all the other grade levels by 80 just to hold steady, which is quite the task. And this is why so many people in Wisconsin, so many school districts in Wisconsin are actually decreasing, is because of this exact reason. So because we're a little bit less than what we're anticipated, our levy will be a little bit less. The amount of revenue we have will be a little bit less than what we're anticipating right now, but not significant because there's a 3-year averaging component going here, so that does have a smoothing effect. The $325 base per member increase per the state budget, that's that 400-year thing that you might have heard a number of years ago, or 2 years ago, I guess, that the governor was able to veto so that we have a continuing revenue increase each year. That was in the state budget, or stays in the state budget. Our categorical aid funding per student, in the past, the legislature has used this as a way to give us additional funds. It stayed steady and has for the last several years. Our July 1st aid estimate was the important thing to understand here is that when the biennial budget was passed, there was no additional funds put into the general state aid equalization formula. And so basically that $325 that I talked about before that we'll be able to spend per student will be borne on the taxpayers this year. In the past, the legislature, at least for the last 10 years, has increased either the state equalization rate formula, which provides some tax relief, or a school levy credit, which also provides tax relief. In this last biennial budget, the legislature chose not to do either. So there will be a property tax impact this year, larger than it has been in the last several years for all school districts in the state of Wisconsin. Special education proration, you might have heard a number of 42%. This is where I get to talk about real quickly some certain and some sufficient. Those are components in the legislation, which basically sub-sufficient basically means whatever the money that's required in order to get to a percentage is required, the legislature will change the allocation to make that work. Certain basically means whatever the dollar amount is, the percentage is going to change. Based on the information that we've received at this point in time, the 42% is not going to be funded, and we're actually using 39.5% as a safe number to anticipate. So just real briefly, because I know I went through that quickly, we are reimbursed the following year based on expenses for our expenditures related to students with IEPs, and that's what that percentage is. So that's one of the reasons why we have such a large transfer, and you'll see that in a second, from our general fund to our special education fund. Equalized values, we estimated about 7.75%. Feeling pretty good with that. That's probably a little bit conservative. We'll see how that plays out. We don't have good information on several of our municipalities. We have good information on about 2 of them, but we have 10 municipalities, so we have to kind of guess a little bit on the others. And that will be known here next week at the latest. So a couple components to the preliminary budget. Carryover funds, I mentioned that before. That's that $2.4 million that we have. They are reserved for strategically multi-year projects, and they are designated as assigned. That amount has dropped fairly significantly in half over the last year. The amount of one-time revenues that have worked over the last several years has really been unprecedented. We've never had that amount of money, but it was really related to the pandemic and different funding sources that the federal government provided, as well as, well, mostly the federal government, I guess you would say. And we are still anticipating in transferring approximately $7 million in the general fund and the special education fund. Last year it was 8. So it is a little bit less, but still significant transfer that has to happen. We would really like that 39.5% to be much higher. it would really help the district from a lot of different points of view. So as we go into, again, combining the two funds, Fund 10 and 27, our revenue this next year is anticipated to be 73.8 million. I'm sorry, that was last year's actual. This year we're anticipating 77.3. Difference is about $5.3 million. And I had a note on that I was going to use. Apologize just a second. I'm almost there. Some things that are still out there are related to open enrollment, transfer service, and those types of things that are one of the things that are driving up that number a little bit. The next slide here talks a little bit about what those revenue different sources are, and you can see real briefly where they're coming from. You see that equalization aid has been fairly flat for our district. That's related to our equalized assessed value being increasing fairly significantly, and then this year no additional funds put into the state budget. This year our equalized assessed value is very normal compared to everybody else in the state. In the past we've been significantly higher than other people in the state. You can see our levy has continued to increase each year as more and more responsibility has been shifted onto the local taxpayer. And then you do see a small bump related to, this is the special education funding going up from approximately 32, I think, percent to 39 or so, or I'm sorry, 29, about 30% to about 29 and 39.5%. So that's what that is. Otherwise, pretty much solid, very consistent. Federal going down from the pandemic projects that were happening out there at the end of COVID, reducing. And then open enrollment has, basically the allocations for open enrollment have been increasing at the state level. Major revenue summary, basically the revenue limit that I've mentioned before really drives the budget. Over 80% of the district's revenue comes through that formula. We did anticipate 15 additional students this year. We actually had an increase in our 3-year average. If you put that 15 in there, would have actually driven that to 22. That will be recalculated as we get into the original budget. It'll be less than that, but probably still an increase because of the increases that we've had over the last 2 years. It's just that it won't be as much. 325. Transfer service, we did anticipate actually a larger amount of money, but some of the students that we anticipated coming that came last year actually didn't end up coming this year. So we had calculated transfer services always based on the prior year, but there were students that we anticipated coming that came last year, but then they didn't actually show up this year, so we actually reduced the transfer service because our expenses aren't here this year. So we were closer to $570,000, so it's only $400,000. Transfer service is related to when students come to us from other districts or from other governmental units, for example, the county, and they have special needs. We need to provide those needs that as were described in individual education plans by other entities, and so we have to provide that information, those services, and so we do get an exemption within the revenue limit. $245,000, this is for our voucher programs. That is based on what last year's was and based on what the dollar amounts that we have been told will be for this year. But I'm going to show you a slide on that that may mean this number is going to increase. Just a second. And then a small decrease in general state aid. It's about $100,000 is what we're anticipating right now. Again, that won't be certified to us until mid-October. Per pupil categorical, as I mentioned, hasn't changed. Open enrollment did significantly increase this last year based on the state budget. That benefits our district, doesn't benefit all districts in the state. Some of those districts have more kids going out than going in, and so that actually does harm them. In our district, we have significantly more students coming to us than leaving, so it does help us. This is what I was talking about as far as the chart related to vouchers. Just so we're clear, when students do go to a voucher school, that cost is passed on to our taxpayers in Oregon if they're residents of Oregon School District. And you can kind of see the impact over the last 5 years, and probably a trend that we would anticipate continuing. So it's been fairly exponential, if you would, related to that. And so our taxpayers will continue to fit that bill, pay that bill. And basically that is an exemption in the revenue limit. We pay that to DPI. We don't know who the students are. We're just told a number essentially in the mid-October, and we have to pass that on. So get a feel for what the trends have been. I mentioned before that more and more funding has been pushed to the local taxpayers for our school district. Partially that's related to the values of our homes. The state aid formula basically looks at that and says the wealthier you are, the more values you have per student, the more wealthy you are, the less state aid you need. And partially that is because the state hasn't fully funded or hasn't put the amount of money that should be put into state equalization aid. Those two things have an impact. The reason I circled kind of in orange, this is we went into what's called negative tertiary aid, which basically means as we spend $1, we might lose a few cents related to state aid, and that's what negative tertiary aid, without getting into it any further. We hit that point when we basically are more wealthy than the average. At least that was the intent. Now, because the state aid formula hasn't gotten the allocations that it should have, we're actually, it's not even the average in the state of Wisconsin. More districts are becoming negative tertiary. Pretty much everybody in Madison is negative tertiary, and that does have an impact. So what that does is it kind of flips the percentages, and you can see that from a state perspective, they're going down fairly significantly, and the local revenue component is increasing. Our expenditures this next year in those two main funds are increasing a little bit, 9%, although if you take out some of the assigned funds that we actually won't probably spend entirely, and they're one-time in nature, it does reduce the percentage closer to 6%. And the other component that I'll mention is we had these OPEB expenditures that I said before that we didn't make last year. Had we made them, that increase would not be as much, because there was about $900,000 in expenses that we would have made with the implicit rate subsidy. And so there's another basically percent or so that would reduce the increase. Expenditure by purpose, you kind of get a feel. Obviously, instruction is our main component of our expenses. Teachers in the classroom, so you'll see that's where the major increase is going. Everything else is fairly marginal, or basically a CPI type increase. And so that's the purpose. And then this is how we use them as a category of object, which is basically describes what the funding is. And again, you'll kind of see salaries and benefits, because we are a very people-intensive organization, that's where they are. Services in a lot of cases increase as well, because they're related to people cost as well. So we have to provide increases there as too. And then you do see a small increase to transfers that I can talk about real briefly in a second. So then how do we get to the $2.4 million in carryover? The decrease in fund balance that I'm going to show you here in a second is related to all the carryover, and that's kind of just a quick reconciliation of those. I know I'm going long. Referendum debt. This year we are anticipating, as a way to reduce the taxpayer impact, about $3.5 million from the general fund to debt service. That reduces our debt service levy and helps provide some tax relief. But we also would like to increase, and this is something that we'll kind of study yet in the next month. It can be changed, but we were looking to possibly defease up to $2.5 million in debt. That can change. Last year we were looking to do 1.25, so that's a doubling of that. We'll kind of look at that as we get into the last month of this and what the impact of that is with the board. But right now the 2.5 is in there. So that you net those two about each other and you still end up kind of reducing the tax levy for debt service by about $1 million, and you leave with a total debt levy of about $5.2 million that we'll have. So you can see our levy schedule is slightly larger than that. We also were anticipating we do have some carryover in our debt service fund, so we would defease more than the 2.5. We actually could defease closer to, I believe, $4.5 million. Food service, again, we're trying to get to a zero impact, so beginning fund balance would hopefully equal negative, the same ending fund balance. So that's just how you get there. Capital projects funds, this is again that fund that paid for Forest Edge, and again we're hoping for a zero balance at the end of the year. We did budget about $1,000 in interest revenues, but we're getting very close to being zero for this fund. Employee trust funds, again this is a little wordy, I apologize. There are two different funds here. This is kind of repetitive because we talked about it last year, for the last year. One talks about sick leave. We are budgeting $325,000 into the future for our sick leave. We actually had an actuarial study done this last year so that we know that would basically fund our sick leave payments for the next 30 years if we continue that allocation. And then OPEB is similar in that regard. Basically, we are required, because we have the fund in order to do that every 2 years, and we were fully funded this last year. And we are planning to enhance that benefit as a retention goal for this school year. Community Education Fund, we break that into 4 different components for our district. Community pool operations, performing arts operations, community ed, research and outreach, and then our kind of security. The security basically is we do hire an employee to basically, actually 2 employees, to be in our facilities on the weekends when the community is using our buildings to make sure that everything's okay and things are secure. So our community education fund, I'm not going to read this to you, but basically we got required every year to share this at the annual meeting that the purpose of community ed is for these purposes. You can read this. It is on the, we'll have it in the packet for you. Tax levy total calculation for the school district, operational wise, is the 40 million. Referendum is the 5.3 that I mentioned before. Community services is the 727. That is a reduction because of the carryover from the last year, for a total levy of 46 million. You'll see how that compares. It's about 2.6 million than last year. The nice thing is the rate does decrease, but still is an increase from last year total, but the rate going down 20 cents is about a 2% decrease in the rate. And again, that might be changed based on our assessed values. Again, this kind of shows what's going on from the district level. Equalization aid is pretty well flat as the operating, basically the district's perspective or increase of property taxes is increasing based on our equalized values increasing. All right, total revenue budget, this is all funds. We're at just under or just over $88 million as we add everything together. The expenditures are about $93 million. There are some reasons for that. I'll go through those very briefly. I know I'm running very late. So 2.4 million, this is related, 2.4 million, that is related to our assigned fund balances that we talked about before. They're all for one-time purposes. Special projects fund is where we have our funds assigned for the splash pad, as well as a lot of different activities that happen throughout the school year. This could be sports teams, those types of things where they're raising funds and then using them for different purposes. But the $390,000 is a little bit shy. We probably will increase that for the original budget, but that's the funds that we would anticipate spending related to the splash pad this next year. Used to be the Special Education Fund 27, a large transfer of $7 million. That's down from 8 last year. Debt service, that is a transfer again from general fund to debt service to provide some tax relief. But you also do see a larger increase in expenditures for debt defeasance in that fund this next year. Capital project fund, that is the funds related to the roofing and the pavement. You do see a small decrease in that fund. We had related that to Netherwood projects that we're kind of reassessing because bids came in last spring a little high, but we are still looking at that as a possible project as well as a couple of others. So we'll be updating that based on that information. Fund 49 is our referendum for 2018, and again, we should have that pretty well spent down by the end of the year. So decreasing that to 0. Food service, hoping to have a 0 impact this year. Revenues equal expenses. Employee trust funds, that's a little bit of a guess on our perspective, but we do have the additional 375,000 that we put in there related to an annual allocation, and so we will be growing that fund in order to anticipate years where we're going to be spending more money than we would actually be putting into that based on the actuarial study. OPEB liability, I've already spent a little bit of time on that and how we're going to be funding that and increasing the actual liability related to the benefit as we improve that. You'll see a slight decrease. If you add all these together, that's that $148,000. I think that $148,000 that we had as a balance last year that we have to then decrease for this year. These three are all combined into one fund for DPI's purposes. And then lastly, Cooperative Purchases Fund is only our Badger Conference Fund, so that's $95,000 in from all the Badger conferences and then $95,000 out. So that is the budget hearing. I apologize, it's a little dry. Hopefully you enjoyed the pictures of the kids in there a little bit. Are there any questions I can answer? All right.
Yeah, just take a call for questions or comments. Anyone attending is welcome to make a statement or ask a question, regardless of your standing with the district. All right. Great job, Andy. Thank you much. All right. We're going to do a refresh of the presentation here. Thank you. Okay, so I will call this meeting, we're moving into the annual meeting now, and I'll call this meeting to order. So as part of the annual meeting, I'll just give you a little background. So anyone in the room, anyone who's attending who is a resident is considered a qualified elector. So if you live within the district, within the Oregon School District, you do have the ability to vote tonight. All votes will be voice votes unless we have a division of the House, and then we will move to ballots. So, all right, the first topic is to elect a chairperson, and thank you, Mr. Tanner. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? And one last time, any other nominations? All right, so we have a motion to elect Troy Pankratz as the chair. All those in favor can say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you for that. Next up, we have the appointment of the parliamentarian. I will go ahead and appoint our in-house counsel, Gina Jonan, as the parliamentarian for the meeting. Next up is the adoption of our ground rules. So the board is proposing ground rules for tonight's meeting. You can find those ground rules in the packet. Those are salmon, I believe, salmon colored handout. So I would take a motion to adopt ground rules as printed. Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. All right, we have minutes from last year's annual meeting. That was September of 2024. The minutes are in the handouts. We will not approve the minutes because the attendees of this year's meeting are different from last year, so those minutes are there for information. All right, our next agenda item is the State of the District report. So I will welcome Dr. Bergstrom up to the podium.
Thank you. We'll make it. Just 1 second. There we go. So, as with many things, I'd like to start the presentation tonight with a bit of a gratitude for and thanks for our Board of Education. And as you all know, they put in a significant amount of time, a significant amount of work and leadership into ensuring we have a student-centered system that prioritizes student achievement and the well-being of each and every individual, while honoring the contributions of the really caring and professional educator staff that we have within our district. But they also understand the importance of partnering with our community, with our families, and serving our students. So what I'm really saying is these are a group of very mission-driven people who are very much guided by our collective values. And I am extraordinarily grateful that I get to work alongside them, and the impact they have is probably much more than you even know on how we serve our students. And our mission, you know, we're all grounded in this, and I just love this picture. She's a wonderful student, and her enthusiasm has always been contagious. But we're helping our kids acquire the skills, the knowledge, and the attitudes to achieve their individual potential, and we know all about that. And then you take a look at our values, because in pursuit of this mission, we are driven by our values. The actions we take in pursuit of our mission must be guided by this. And the pictures you see up here are definitely pictures of, I want to also say there's a through line of a little bit of joy in the service of our students through our values. And the idea that all of these caring and professional educators are creating these relevant and empowering learning experiences, and they're centering equity, and they're working with families, and everything we do is around the idea that our children are whole people and not just students with academic test scores. And when I look at these, it's really, I don't know, the pictures are an example, I think, of how we live out our values, right? You see our teachers having intense and meaningful learning conversations. You see Bryson here from RCI, and then you have the Forest Edge teachers up there at the back to school assembly, and the idea that our teachers are caring for one another in addition to caring for our kids, and you can see that in and how they are with one another. The really amazing work that's being done right now in athletics to prioritize the development of our young people as athletes, but also as human beings. And I think what Coach Weber is trying to do right now with our football program is an excellent example with that. And then how can you look at kindergartners and just not feel a little bit of joy? And you see that coming from Miss Jakey's room. Now, all of this, the mission, our values in service of that mission, it's all culminating in the idea of what do we want for our kids? Well, what we want for our kids is what we've articulated in the Portrait of a Graduate. And that's really going to be how we frame a lot of tonight's. It's really a celebration of the Oregon School District, State of the District. It's a celebration of the amazing students that we have and the dedicated educators who make things happen alongside them. So every year, our board takes a look at what should be the key priorities. Now, what I think is really important to note, and those of you who are at the back to school assembly, a lot of this will be very familiar, but it's the idea that these priorities, what we know to be critical in educating students, they stay remarkably consistent over time. They're reviewed annually because we know we need to be responsive, but we also know that what is critical rarely changes. Number 6 was actually added in 2024 in response to our community's very slow and steady growth and the associated needs. Now we then take our district goals and we do a very similar approach. It's also slow and steady, right? Because we know what the board priorities are. We know what we need to accomplish as a district, what our key measurables are in connection to that. And while each goal that you see here has a connected strategy or multiple strategies and points of measurement, what I think is also really important to note is that the key strategy we've been emphasizing for a long time and is really important this year, which is the professional learning communities and the idea of having uninterrupted time so that our educators who are specialists, and when I say that, I'm referring to those in the roles of things like our multilingual teachers or our teachers who are case managers for students who access IEPs, or our teachers who are interventionists in reading and math. Those types of specialty areas rarely have the opportunity to meet with the grade level teachers and talk about scaffolds and supports that could be a part of the universal instruction that would benefit all learners. And our key strategy in this upcoming year, and is related to our late start starting in January, late student start, is connected to that key strategy of providing that time so that we're really giving our educators the best possible opportunity to make meaningful learning experiences, responsive learning experiences for our students. And our theme for the year. So we do have district goals, but we also have really specific student learning goals. And I'll get to those in a second. But how we're choosing to view what we're doing this year is very thematic. The idea of elevate, and how we will be elevating our collaborative, purposeful efforts to do certain things, such as elevating our professional practice to support student learning, particularly the students for whom the system is not working as well as it should. And I'll get to that in a minute. Elevate the voices and the perspectives of our students and our families who feel marginalized in our school system. Elevating the strengths and the interests and the needs of our students who are underserved when planning our Tier 1 or universal instruction, because what will lift their learning will lift the learning of all students. Elevate inclusion and accessibility, and then elevating joy and empathy and care that we have for our students, but what we also want them to have for one another, just like what we have for one another as people who are working in the system. Now, these are the measurable goals that we're all focusing on quite significantly. Ultimately, we're always working on demonstration of proficiency, and then we've selected reading as an area of focus because it's a common thread for all subject areas. But we're always working on making sure we're increasing the number of students who are proficient by 5% year after year. However, what we're really elevating this year is we're elevating the idea that if we focus in on students who we haven't been serving as well as we should, and that's definitely what our data tells us, that if we focus on our students who are multilingual and have access scores of less than 6. And for those of you who aren't sure, the access score is a reading proficiency score or test taken annually, and 6 indicates proficiency in English. So if you're a multilingual student and your access score is less than 6, that means that you are still striving toward English proficiency. Our students who access IEPs, and our students who are Black or our students who are Hispanic. Those are the students that we are really going to elevate our focus on this year, prioritize in our discussions, because we know what best serves them will also best serve all other students. And then how we're going to look at how we're doing the things I just spoke about, we'll do that through the lens of the Portrait of a Graduate. So here, when we're discussing our competency goals, which I just referred to, but we have goals in all of these areas, but for competency in particular, this comes from Board Policy 41101 and key strategies that we're using to meet our academic goals. And you've heard this before. This is nothing new because we stay very steady on what we know works. The 100-day plans that are helping us to be very thoughtful and have short cycles of study so that we can make adjustments when we're not having the impact that we know we should. Continued focus on highly effective PLCs that allow us to better serve all students. Continued focus on selected universal strategies, because we know that there are many strategies that have a positive impact on students, but we also know that time is precious. So we've used research to select the strategies that we know will have the greatest impact on students and use our professional development time to better learn and practice those. And then also reinvesting in our really deep equity work in order to better serve all of our children. And those are all things that we are all doing, every one of the schools. But then there are things that are specific to schools or grade bands that are a really important part of our competency goals, such as the updated K-8 ELA curriculum, our updated 5-8 math curriculum, the addition of AVID at Oregon Middle School. AVID's been a successful program at the high school for probably about 8 years now, and this is the first year we're also bringing that program to the middle school, and that's very exciting. And I also want to mention our updated electronic devices policy, because that's helping us ensure readiness for learning by decreasing the amount of distraction that's happening in the classrooms. For our character and culture, this is really the aspects that are listed specifically in the Portrait of a Graduate, which is Policy 41102. So there's many things that are listed out that are really important related to character and culture. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them because you could talk about all of them all night long. So if we were to talk about the ability to employ strategies that support our students' physical and mental wellness, which is a key component to this aspect of Portrait of a Graduate. We really need to note, and this will be definitely highlighted in the board meeting that is post the annual meeting when Dr. Anderson speaks about student services, but the idea that we really were pioneers in the area of school mental health, school-based mental health, and what we need to do to support our students to ensure that they are well and whole and thus able to actually access the instruction that we're providing. And we know these things are working because we have data to show that through Dane County Youth Assessment and Panorama. Also, when we're talking about physical and mental wellness, the fact that we have an increasing number of athletes, and you'll hear more about that in the board meeting post the annual meeting also, in addition to an increasing number of students participating in co-curriculars, because we continue to add clubs to our co-curricular schedules, such as the addition of the Multicultural Student Achievement Network Club at the high school and potentially the middle school too. Another part to this is the idea of building empathy, seeking out and understanding the perspectives of others, creating classrooms that are inclusive and show care to all students. Now, obviously, this is a huge part of our professional learning, but I'll also say that this is something that we see in practice with our students on a really regular basis. For example, a student-driven project last year that was really quite fun was the Multicultural Student Network's fashion show that took place in the spring. The students designed the entire thing beginning to end, invited people in, and we're really highlighting the idea that we as a community are represented by many cultures and we need to celebrate that. Another really good example is something that was really the highlight of my weekend. weekend, because Sunday night, all of our visitors from our German sister school arrived at our cafeteria, and it was quite the event. We had probably 50 to 60 people waiting at the high school for the bus to arrive so that there could be banners and noisemakers and lots of applause when the students and the staff from our German sister school arrived here. And then they will be staying with us in the homes of our families for 3 weeks. And one of the things that I think is really critical about that idea and how it builds empathy and the idea of taking the perspective of others is that we are building international friendships with this program, that we're helping people to see all the things that we have in common as a part of our shared humanity and continue to learn and grow from one another. It's exciting work. Now, critical and creative thinking. I have a lot of examples of this in our amazing music program and our amazing art program, but I think it's really important to note that critical and creative thinking is a part of every offering, not just music and art. However, we've got some really cool things, so I'm just going to read off a few. So in the Oregon School District in grades 6 through 12, we had 83 musicians who qualified for state after competing in the school Music Association State Solo and Ensemble Festival. 83 students in a total of 58 events. And then 15 of those performances were nominated for an Exemplary Performance Award. And these are students who get up super early in the morning on a weekend to go to another high school and compete and to show what they can do in their musical performance. That's really pretty exciting that there's that level of internal motivation and pride in what they're able to do based off the experiences they're having in our classroom. If you didn't go to last year's The Little Mermaid, that was part of the high school musical, or the middle school musical, The Lion King Jr. If you didn't go, put this year's on your calendar, because once again, it's a showcase of critical and creative thinking and putting on those productions. And our students have a number of guest composers and clinicians visiting. And then we have all kinds of exciting projects that filter down from one school to another. For example, students in music writing and composition wrote music for the grade 6 orchestra to perform. So there are all kinds of ways that creative and critical thinking are present in our music courses. And in art, we had over 80 students featured in the district art show. We have students who are in our art programs displaying art at different local coffee shops, which is always really exciting. We also had, over 300 submissions for the annual Fall Photo Challenge, so that was also a fun thing. We always have, and this is such a fascinating thing to me, we always have art contestants in the Wisconsin Federal Junior Duck Stamp Competition. Every year we have really amazing entries. And this year, one of our students wrote the winning conservation message. We host the Badger Conference Art Show on occasion. Our OHS art students and National Honor Society combined forces to partner with a school in Malawi to create self-portraits for students in the school in Malawi, which was another really cool way to create a sharing of perspectives and experiences and show critical and creative thinking. And then our OHS ceramics class paired with a kindergarten class so that when the kindergartners drew a flat depiction of an object, the ceramic students made that object 3D and then brought it back to the class to show them what their object looked like in that manner. So these are excellent examples, and I also hope that you notice that all of these are examples. Some of them are inside the classroom, some of them are outside the classroom, because in our district there isn't a difference, right? It's all about learning, whether it's in the classroom or in the co-curricular. It's about how we can learn and grow together and how we can all become even better versions of ourselves. And then community. So you see this great picture here of our Oregon Middle School long-standing tradition of raking leaves for their neighbors, but we also have other long-standing traditions that are pretty cool indicators of the connection between the schools and the students in particular and their community, such as the Rotary and the connection with the 8th graders who do all of that great work at Lerner Park every spring. If ever you have an opportunity to volunteer, I suggest you do so, because students are planting, they're pulling invasive species, they're putting gravel and mulch down for trails, they're contributing to their community in a really important way. We also know that we have the Oregon Area Education Foundation is just getting started, and they are building on the amazing work of the Friends of Oregon School District, who also, as their organization is sunsetting, have contributed a considerable amount to the startup for the Education Foundation, specific to things like the Champion Grant and supporting the mentoring program and ensuring that there's 5 years of funding for Avid tutors. So both of those, Friends and the newly formed foundation, are great examples of what happens when communities are really behind schools. And then I just think that it's important to note that a lot of our athletic teams have a tradition of volunteerism. That's a part of being an athlete on most of our teams, is that you build a team through doing good works for others together. Once again, an example of the whole child philosophy. So it's critical to end this hopefully brief presentation of the state of the district by looking back at our values, because I hope it's been made very evident that as a school district we truly try to live by those values as the adults in the system, but also our students are excellent representations of what it means to live by those values. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. So much to celebrate and so much to be proud of in this community. So, all right. With that, we're going to move on to the new business section of our agenda. And we'll start with resolution A, which is the adoption of our tax levy. So again, I'll remind you that we do have suggested motions in your handout material, green sheet. So at this point, I would accept a motion for the tax levy.
I move to adopt the tax levy as follows. Do I need to read it all out, or should I just say it in the green?
You can say as.
I should say it, okay. Irrepealable debt retirement levy, $5,231,904. Current operation other fund levy, $40,801,964, and the total levy of $46,033,868.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Motion and a second. All right, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. All right, we have a tax levy. Next up, we have the adoption of school board salaries. So we need to adopt school board salaries for 25-26. There's a suggested motion in the packet. I will note that it is recommended that all board members abstain from this item. Do we have a motion?
Salaries of the board members of the school district be set as previously stated at the following amounts for the school term of 2025 to 2026.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? We have a second. All those in, Cindy. Any discussion?
I would like to abstain from this vote.
All right. Ms. Wright abstains. I think all board members will be abstaining. Seeing head nods. Okay. So all those in favor of that motion as read, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. All right. Next up, we have items 8C. I don't think we have a slide for that. So that motion 8C is the reimbursement of board members' expenses for school business.
I move to authorize the payment of actual and necessary expenses of the school board member when traveling and the performance of their duties.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion on this item? Yes.
It's recommended the board members also abstain from this as well.
Yes. So I'm seeing board members abstaining. All those in favor, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Next up, we have to set the date and the hour for the 2026 annual meeting. That'll be for next year. I would entertain a motion.
Make a motion to set the date and hour for next annual meeting to be September 28th, 2026 at 6:30 p.m.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second? Sorry, was there a second? All right. Got that, Katie? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. We have a date and time for the 26th annual meeting, which brings us to the completion of tonight's agenda. So I do want to thank everyone for coming. It's so great to see community members in the audience for this important meeting. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn. Motion, is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Have a great evening.